you're expecting that type of Corvette video, not today. Today it is all business. Damaged, forgotten, destroyed Corvette business. It does just so happen though that this is my favorite type of business. And that's why today we find ourselves at the salvage auction. Let me clarify. That's why today we find ourselves at one of the biggest salvage auctions on the face of the earth. We're here to do one thing and one thing only. Buy cheap Corvettes. Sort of like this one, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Oh boy, this one's a little bit of a touchy subject for me. I've also had an Atomic Orange ZR1.
That's not right.
And it also didn't meet the best end. I suppose we'll phrase it like that. Though at least in my case, it didn't end up here and didn't end up like this. There is one very big, huge, major problem up there, but we'll look at the rest of the car first. One bit of a downer here is the door locks on these, as most of you guys know, are electric, so we're not gonna be able to get into it. The car is sealed shut. On the passenger side here, there's not a single panel that doesn't have damage, some more intense than others, but as for the rear quarter panel, it's all chipped up. I would assume that a good fiberglass guy can just fix that. I don't think that's gonna be horrendous. The door, probably the same deal, though the doors aren't that expensive, so you might wanna just replace that. The quarter panels, they are a little pricier. All right, now on the back end, it's not too bad. It looks like a respectable car. If you ignore the fact that it's doing that, it actually looks fairly complete and pretty good, honestly. Left-hand driver quarter, left-hand suspension, all looks good. Door, front fender, looks a little wonky. Unfortunately, it did get ripped off up there. I'm gonna have to assume the frame swayed a little bit. When that happens, it kind of hangs onto the fender and does this. That front wheel, I don't think that's in the right place. So here's where we get into the worse. We're gonna get into the really bad in a minute, but as for the worse, the front bumper, absolute trash. The front frame rail section that is aluminum, which is always a key point in these. Don't get me wrong, even on a steel frame car, this will be no fun to fix, but on an aluminum frame, it is. I'm not gonna call it impossible, but there are very few shops who will take it on, unless, I think we found our first little bit of hackery. The frames on these Corvettes, they are one giant piece. There are no bolts, definitely no Home Depot bolts holding them together. Yeah, somebody's been in here before and I don't think it was done very well. Aftermarket hardware all the way across, though it is matching, so I guess you get a couple bonus points for that. But right there, this front frame rail section is cut off another car. I suppose it got widened out, slipped over the existing frame and just through bolted, which is, I mean, I guess it works, but I'm not gonna pretend to like it. I do suppose I'll give credit where credit is due. When this car got smashed yet again, it didn't break. The through bolts, all that stuff right there, it held up. It had issues back further, so maybe this is one of those examples of you didn't do it the right way, but at least it worked. I have said often it's not dumb if it works, so maybe I just talked myself into thinking that's not the worst idea in the world. But anyway, let's move on to the very bad. This right here. For those who aren't in the know, that's the oil pan to these. You might be questioning yourself thinking that doesn't look like an oil pan. While you technically be right about certain aspects of that, this is the dry sump oil tank. It is blown into multiple pieces. I suppose some got left on the road. There's some hanging there still. I have no clue what that is. Some diamond plate welded hacked together thing. Definitely more hackery. It looks like they did a really bad job of trying to enhance the capacity of this. The reason this is such a big issue though is once that got blown open, if this car ran for any amount of time, which is possible, that 7-liter LS7 lost oil pressure very quickly and you run the risk of damaging the engine quick. Compounding the issues on these cars, the engine harness. These are the ECU connectors. They are blasted. I mean, absolutely blasted. The ECU is nowhere to be found. Typically it mounts up there and there's not even a mount at this point. Unfortunately on these cars, the engine harnesses are not cheap. They are really expensive. As for the engine, up here at least, from the top, there's no active damage. Somebody did pull a lot of relays, however. The hood itself somewhat looks like it's in one piece, but then you get about down there and see that it's cracked in half. That is something you could glass back together, so I suppose it's not the worst thing in the world. This one has some stock headers, so this is one of the very rare remaining stockish LS7 cars. As far as I can tell, it just has an intake. Coming back to the rear of the car, even the mufflers are stock. We could spend a ton of time going over the damage on this car, talking about what you would need to do if you wanted to rebuild this, but the fact is this is definitely not a rebuilder. This one's a parts car through and through, and other than that dry sump oil tank being ripped off, it's one that I would buy 10 times out of 10. That oil tank being busted adds a ton of risk to this car, and the problem is people very rarely assess that properly. There's a chance, and I would call it a likely chance, that whoever buys this car is gonna pay for it like that oil tank was never even damaged. Cars like this, it does work out for you sometimes, but when you get burned doing something like that, you get burned bad. So for us, more times than not, it means that we can't match what people are paying for these cars, and this one might be destined to stay here. On the scale of 0 to rebuildable, this one is indeed a 0, and I think we will all agree on that one. It's a tale as old as time. People hop in our comments when we post a car up for part out saying, no, you should have saved that, you should have fixed that. I think for the first time in history, we can all agree that this one is not fixable, to the point where I don't even want to show the whole thing. It's just a really rough car. So this one, we can make it short and sweet. All I would be worried about in this is what's good part-wise. Of course, because I'm me, the first thing I see is that aftermarket Borla exhaust, which is worth a few bucks. That's always nice to see. A lot of cars that you see us part out are in much better shape than this, and that's for a very good reason. When a car's hit this bad, no matter what, it's always going to damage the drivetrain in some way, shape, or form. If you look straight down the middle of this car, the engine, it is that way, I don't know, at least 6 inches. This one's an incredible hit. Most of the damage would have been back there on the torque tube, but it is highly likely. I would almost say it's guaranteed that the engine got damaged. Whether it's a motor mount cracked off the block, a hole in the AC compressor, I don't know, and frankly, I'm not getting under this car to find out. But as is the case with everything in the salvage industry, for the right price, it might still be a winner. You do have bits of value on this car, like the brake calipers there, like that partial or maybe even good headlight. Somehow that headlight is fully bolted on still. Even if the bottom end's damaged down there, which is where the damage most likely is on that motor, the cylinder heads, they're good. The intake manifold setup, that's good. And that alone, you have $1,500 some dollars. If the accessory drive survived, which, judging by the fact that the belt is still on it and tensioned, and the alternator's not broken, which is the first thing to go on these cars, it very well could be the case. The reason I'm going over all this stuff is to show you guys that no matter what, these cars have value. Assuming it goes for the right price, I wouldn't be surprised if we bought this thing. In fact, there's only one single thing that might prohibit us from buying this. It's halfway across the country, and on a car that's this cheap, that has this little value in it, it has to go really cheap. Anyway, nice. I do like that. I am excited about that. It has to go really cheap for us to be able to buy it. That was the whole point there. Anyway, we're probably not going to be able to afford to ship it. There we go. That thing sounded pretty good for a Volkswagen, didn't it? There we are. It's a little old at this point and truthfully a little outdated, but there's no denying it looks awesome. Once upon a time, this was the best of what Chevy had to offer, and if we ignore that little mishap up there, this car looks exceptionally clean. Just off the jump, the paint, it looks great. The wheels, they're in fantastic shape. If I had to guess, this is probably a fairly low mileage example, even though that might tell a different story. As for the interior, classic black, it's in pretty good shape. Not great, but decent. A lot of this Z06 stuff, and at this point C5 stuff in general, is starting to get really valuable. This panel here, if it wasn't doing this, $400. That glove box over there, if it's in good shape, which who knows if that's going to be the case, also really expensive. Climate control, the radio, the gauge cluster, all worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The Z06 differential, the Z06 trans, they're twice the price of the base cars, and they're super hard to find these days. By now, so many of these have been blown up, destroyed, ended up in places like this, that there's just not a lot of them out there for sale. One of the defining features of the C5 Z06, a factory titanium exhaust. It's an awesome piece, it's super light, and this car still has it. One thing I noticed as I came to shut the door, if you look over there, it's a black door panel. This one over here, it has a gray lower half, so it's not the factory door panel. I don't know what's up with that. Tough look. I mean, really tough look. This one got absolutely whacked. I don't know that we're gonna be able to get under the hood. We can to some extent. That side over there is taped shut, but it is a naturally aspirated car. You can see that. There's no blower, unfortunately. The stock intake is laying right there. In fact, it's clearly not where it should be. Without getting the hood up, it might be a little tough to see, but that frame rail, it's supposed to be level, supposed to be straight. That makes sense, right? It is up that way. By any metric, that's not a good thing. Over here on the driver's side, once again, very hard to tell, but if you poke your head, or camera in this case, right through there, you can see that frame rail is kinked that way pretty good. I think it's pretty obvious what happened to this one. It took a tree, a pole, I don't know, something hard and rigid right there. It pushed that frame rail up and brought that one that way. Honestly, it is kind of a shame. As much as I love buying these cars for parts, this was 110% somebody's baby. Look at even the brake calipers. They're in fantastic shape. You can see that this car has a lot of money in it as far as replacement parts. It's not heavily modified, but somebody tried their best to take care of it until this happened. Once again, it's pretty hard to tell without the hood open, but if you look at the engine in there, it still looks level. I don't think that that frame rail over there is bent up far enough to have really damaged the engine. If I had to make a bet, which is essentially what buying a car like this is, I would lean towards it being good and therefore buyable. I'll have to hit IAA.com to check the mileage on it, but say it has 100,000 miles, just for a nice round number. I would estimate this goes for 7,500 bucks. Cheap by today's car standards, but for a C5, that's still a lot of money. This could be quite possibly the least impressive vet we see all day, but cars like this have been a backbone of our parts business for a long time, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why. As for C6s go, this is an 05 and it's automatic, which is pretty much the worst one they ever made. It's got the 6-liter LS2 in it, not the newer 6.2-liter LS3. Once again, this car is sealed shut, so you're gonna have to take my word for it. But the 2005 automatic transmission and rear diff, also horrendous. On the surface, by all metrics, this is pretty lackluster for a C6. Even as somebody who loves these cars, this one does it for me not at all. But the thing we have to remember is it doesn't do it for anybody else either. There's a lot of these cars out there. There's not a lot of people that really want to restore them. That means the price goes down and there's still a ton of parts value in it. Even though it's the worst engine that ever got put in a C6, that long block as it sits with say 105,000 miles like this car has is a $5,000 engine all day long. One thing parts wise this car definitely doesn't have going for it, that auto trans and rear diff is $1,000 maybe for the pair. If the car was by chance, say, manual, that would be a $3,000 combo. All of that driver suspension, front and rear, that's all good. Those corners are super popular to use in kit cars and resto mods. This target top here, that's something you don't get on a Z06. And if it's in good shape, as this one appears to be, $1,000. Just like the C5s, these C6s are getting old enough where the interior's actually starting to be valuable. A lot of that interior stuff is the same on an 05 base car as it is on a 2013 Z06. Ultimately, why we love cars like this and why we keep buying them over and over, they don't pull that much money at auction. It's very likely that this car sells for $6,500, $7,000. We almost made that up in the motor. Cars like this are by no means impressive. We can all agree on that. But doing these over and over and making a solid return on them in the parts business allows us to buy a lot of stuff that is quite impressive. Yeah, I do like this. I like this a lot. Black C5 and most importantly, HRE wheels. Ultra rare to find at salvage auction and not cheap. Not only that, but it looks like we have a set of 2-piece brake rotors on there as well. I'm not even into this car yet and I'm already excited about it. Everyone knows how I feel about C5s. They're not the best cars, but the C5 Z06, love it. Super aggressive looking. If you can get over that interior, it's one of the coolest Corvettes ever made in my opinion. The front end on this, immaculate. I can't really tell about the paint, but as far as damage, it looks beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And we haven't decided if this is a part out car or a fixer yet, but if it ends up being a part car, each headlight about $500. That full front bumper assembly, also really expensive. That rear window is nowhere to be found. I guess it got busted out somehow. Unfortunately, these aren't cheap anymore, but we do get them once in a while at the shop. Oh, okay. I'm sold. I don't know that I've wanted to buy a C5 at auction this bad, ever. Yeah. Ever is the right term. The C5 seats are notoriously bad, so not only did this person upgrade to the C6 seats, they did it to the 2012 and ups. They had them custom upholstered, Alcantara centers, leather outers with yellow stitching, definitely 10 out of 10. These windows are pretty heavily tinted. I did not expect that. Overall, the interior to this car is just in beautiful shape. That knob kind of looks like it might glow in the dark. You might think that sounds cheesy, but it's actually pretty cool. That ultra expensive driver knee panel, that's actually in good shape. It's a little loose, but it's still in one piece. Everything in here looks really nice. Based on what we saw in this car alone already, it's not hard to get the picture. This was somebody's baby. They really took care of it. The engine bay though, It's pretty stock. I can't say I expected that. Typically modding the engine is the first thing people do on these instead of doing a really nice interior and expensive wheels. Stock headers and even a stock intake, that's actually kind of wild. It might not look the cleanest right now, but according to the sticker on the window, this car has 48,000 miles. You do see the 50th anniversary badge there, so it's a 2003. It's rare that I say this, but this is a C5 that I'd really like to rebuild, so let's see if it's possible. The rear frame rail section, at least the part that runs along the back bumper, that's completely 45 degreed up. It definitely doesn't have the factory titanium exhaust, and whatever aftermarket exhaust was on it, half of it's missing. I can't quite fit the camera in there, but it looks like they're Corsas. Aftermarket taillights as well. This one, because of this rear tub damage and because it's a C5, it's at most a $25,000 car as it sits if it were clean title. I don't know that this is the one. Also very unfortunate, but that beautiful HRE wheel, you're gonna need to replace one of those as well. If I had to guess, just looking at it like this, it's probably a parts car. Everything we see down there, even without looking super hard into it, it's a lot for a C5. But every one of you already knows that I'm not too mad about it. I would love to get this thing to part out. And on the scale of C5 Z06s, this is about as good as it gets for a parts car. One of the biggest advantages in parts cars is when they're hit so bad that they're not an easy fix, yet it doesn't do much to the value of the car on the parts side, and that's exactly what we have here. The trunk, the rear bumper, that tub, it doesn't matter at all. That rear quarter panel, all those parts combined are maybe $1,000. The HRE, the one missing Corsa, that's not great, but beggars can't be choosers, right? One of the reasons why I love these cars, the old LS6 engine, 5.7 liters, kind of old technology, but as these Z06s approach collector status, when somebody pops their LS6 in one of these, they don't want to put a different motor in it. They've been steadily going up in price for years now, and believe it or not, the low mileage units, say under 50,000 like this one, they're going to pull the same thing that a new modern LS3 would. They make way less power. It's not nearly as good of an engine for anything other than putting back in a C5 Z06. However, because there's so few of them out there and there's people that are actively waiting for them, as soon as you get one, you post it for a price that you pretty much can dictate and somebody's buying. Absolutely 100% I want to buy this car. It is going to be expensive. Frankly, I don't care. This car has a ridiculous amount of stuff going for it, and there's so much parts value here that I'll gladly pay at the top of my C5Z price range. Maybe as high as 10, 11, 12 grand. I don't think there's going to be much that's going to stop that car from coming back to Maryland with us. Yeah, like I said, not much stopping this from coming home to Maryland with us. And while we couldn't get it started there, now we have jump boxes and all the tools we could ever need so we can fire this thing up. It's been a couple weeks since I've seen this car. It took a little bit to get it shipped from Texas to us here in Maryland, so it's kind of relearning the thing all over again. I still find it weird that it has stock headers, but hey, if I had to pick between a set of headers and these awesome seats, which I'm still super hyped about, I'm sure you guys can tell, I think you know which one I'm taking. Of course, this is the one vantage point that we don't get to look at when we're at the auctions, so I'm pretty excited to see what's going on underneath this car. I know you guys were thinking it. I'm thinking it too. This is the cleanest salvage auction car ever. Yes. This thing is beautiful. All I did was spray it off with a power washer. It hasn't been washed. It hasn't been waxed. It's beautiful. I don't really see any damage. I believe those are just casting holes. That doesn't look like actual damage. As per usual, the control arms on the bottom, they have marks from the loaders at the salvage auction. Unfortunately, maybe those auction loaders got the inside of the HREs too. We didn't have a full set, but it'd still be nice to have some that didn't have damaged insides. Still by far, the weirdest part of this car to me is the stock header back exhaust. It does have an aftermarket catback, but that's the part we actually don't want to be aftermarket. Those aftermarket mufflers, or muffler rather, aside, everything else under here is bone stock. It's not always a bad thing. There's not a lot of value in aftermarket suspension on C5s unless it's a crazy track car. The trans, the diff, they're worth a ton of money and they're beautiful. They are really nice looking.
This differential looks almost brand new.
It really does. The hardware, everything. I can't tell if it was opened, if it was rebuilt, or it's just a really clean car, which is my guess. So no crazy surprises, good or bad under here, which hey, I'll take it. No leaking oil, nothing weird. I think it's time to put it down and fire it up. Definitely a stock clutch. This thing probably hasn't been opened ever. One muffler does not sound good.
Yeah.
You know what this reminds me of?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the same thing.
It's got perfect oil pressure. It has an awesome screen. It has a working climate control. These are like $500 when the LEDs work. Obviously this one does. In the grand scheme of things, I suppose we can deal with it sounding like an express van for a couple days before we take it apart, if it means we're gonna make a ton of money on it.
This car is kind of weird because you spent money on HREs, but you got clear tail lights, but you didn't lower it, and you know, it's weird.
I don't mind the clear taillights. They're definitely not my taste, but I can't say the car is poorly modded because of them, because they do look better than stock C5 lights. No one's ever liked stock C5 lights, ever.
Nah, yeah,
Ever. We're gonna ignore that back there because up here in the engine bay, it's as quiet as you'd ever want. The absolute perfect 5.7 sound. No knocks, no rattles, nothing. No, that only applies to back there. Up there, it's thumbs up, for sure. Not so subtly gonna say that I'm glad I don't have to listen to that exhaust anymore.
This is fancy, look.
That is fancy for a C5, I'm not gonna lie. How'd that not get blasted off of it?
That's weird.
All right, we got the full electronics package on here, if you will. A reverse camera, high technology for a 2004? I gotta stop thinking all C5s are from the 90s. I mean, but when you look in the interior, you could forgive me because this thing looks terrible.
Look at this steering wheel.
Terrible. Either way, the more I look at this car, the more money I see this full, complete front end. The two-piece rotors. There's a lot of money on this car, and we've already started making it. When this car ran at auction, I paid $10,025 for it. By the time we shipped it, paid fees, we were at roughly $11,500. But we've already sold the engine. LS6s, especially in this low mileage condition, are so hard to find these days. We pretty much have a wait list for them, and before this car ever got here, we had $6,500 in hand for this engine. We only need to make up another $5,000 on this car until we break even. That $5,000 on a car like this is gonna come really easy. This Z06 was the first of the cars you've seen in this video to come up for auction. Hopefully once some of the other ones are finally available for bidding, we can win a few more and send them back east. But for now, let's get back to Texas. I do suppose this is poetic. For the last car of the day, we're gonna do the one that looks like the one I already own. At least until, well, you get up here. There's something going on up there. I'm not sure exactly what it is. And then there's the fact that this is a Grand Sport and not a ZR1, but an awesome looking Grand Sport nonetheless. And from right here, though that's not saying much because it looks like the car is sitting down a little lower on the other side, it looks awesome. I'm personally a big fan of these red quarter panel stripes. I think they look sick, especially on Supersonic Blue. To me, they look so sick that it doesn't even matter that this car is practically sitting on the ground. That wheel, gone. Don't know what he hit, but it wasn't light. Front bumper there, front quarter panel. He slid down something pretty good, but I suppose that is better than an impact that way. Moving backwards. Same deal over there. He rubbed down something, screwed up the wheels. This one is bent in a good bit. Gotta give it up, I do like those exhaust tips. The blue, I'm positive that's not a titanium exhaust, and looking under, it's poorly welded on aftermarket tips. But it still looks pretty cool blue on blue. This is kind of open a little bit. We're not gonna rip it off, but it's red interior. Oh, sorry, I got excited there. Whew. I almost have to cool down for a second. Red interior on Supersonic Blue, the new 2012 and up seats. This is a beautiful car. Red interior, red stripes, color combo on point. If this car is a blower, I'm gonna need to take a 5-minute break. Oh no. It actually looks bone stock. You have a dusty old LS3. You have stock headers, stock intake. You're missing a power steering cap, which is weird. Otherwise, yeah, bone stock car. The radiator support's damaged. The upper radiator mounting bracket, that's cracked. That's fairly common when that radiator gets moved around. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that lower radiator support, that's broken as well. Also very common. As for the engine itself, everything looks good there. Being that this had some underside damage, let's check the oil. Perfectly fine. This is a game I like to call Watch Me Get It in the Hole. There we go. Not as easy as it looks, is it, guys? Using my detective skills, I suppose there has been some kind of rodent under here, but now that I know the oil pan's not blown off of it, this is one I would consider buying for the parts business, even though I do think it's more likely that somebody ultimately fixes this car. It's just too nice. Devil's advocate there, there's a lot of money in this car. The LS3, those red seats, oh my God, I'm doing it again. They're worth a lot of money. So I'll be able to pay a lot for this car. question is it going to be as much as somebody who's willing to put this thing back on the road? As of right now, I don't know. But the only thing we can do at this point is get back to the shop and wait till all these cars that we saw today run at auction. We can all agree that I'm not the most patient person, but in times like this, we don't have much of a choice. So let me know which ones you want to see us buy. Let me know which ones you will buy and for what reason. That's a very important distinction. Do you want to buy something to part out? Do you want to buy something to feed your project? Or do you want to just buy a car, fix it, and drive it? As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you back here very shortly at the salvage auction.